If only the big boss had walked past the child that afternoon, the entire street would not have gone silent in terror. The mafia boss was standing outside the Kamara marketplace, his dark coat cutting a sharp shape against the dusty air. 3 rival gang members had made the mistake of crossing into his territory. They pressed their backs against a crumbling wall, eyes low, hands trembling. Market women turned away. Street boys melted into alleyways. Even the dogs seemed to understand. The boss said nothing. His silence carried more weight than any threat ever could. Then a small boy walked straight through the frozen crowd, calm as a Sunday morning. He could not have been older than 8. He wore a faded blue shirt and had no shoes on his feet. He stopped directly in front of the boss, tilted his face upward, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Your hands are still burning from the fire." The entire street went cold. Nobody moved. Nobody understood what the child meant. But the boss understood. Every word. His chest tightened like a fist squeezing it from the inside. He grabbed the boy's thin arm and pulled him close, eyes scanning the crowd for whoever had coached this child. "Who told you that?" he demanded. 3 weeks earlier, nobody in the city would have believed the big boss capable of anything gentle. His name was Karim Adu, but nobody used it. On the streets, he was simply the boss, the mafia boss, the man whose shadow made strong men step aside. He controlled 6 districts, 3 ports, and more police officers than anyone cared to count. He had built his empire on fear and maintained it the same way. So when he announced the Neighborhood Shield program, the city held its breath. His men began arriving in poor communities every Thursday morning. Trucks carrying rice, cooking oil, school bags, notebooks, and basic medicine. No conditions attached. Captains who once collected money by force now handed out supplies with careful, almost confused politeness. Underground forums exploded with questions. Was this a trick? A political move? A new form of control? But children did not ask questions. They took the food and ran home laughing. Mothers sent prayers through neighbors. Teachers wrote letters nobody expected to reach the boss. And in one quiet corner of the Bernie district, among families seated on wooden benches waiting for supplies, a thin boy sat completely still. He did not reach for the offered rice bag. He simply watched the boss from across the dusty yard with eyes that were far too steady for a child his age. The following week, the mafia boss visited St. Amara Primary School personally. His security team arrived first, sweeping classrooms and checking exits as though preparing for a presidential visit. Parents gathered nervously outside the gate. Teachers straightened their clothing and rehearsed calm expressions. When the boss arrived, he walked through the school with surprising quietness. He shook teachers' hands. He glanced at drawings pinned to classroom walls. He handed an envelope of money to the headmistress without a speech and without waiting for applause. Parents whispered among themselves. This was not the man they had feared for years. Or perhaps it was, wearing a different coat. For a brief hour, people allowed themselves to believe something had shifted. Then one moment stopped everything. The boss passed through a classroom where the thin boy from Bernie district sat at the front row. The child did not smile or wave like the others. He sat with both hands flat on his desk and stared at the boss's hands with quiet, focused intensity. Not at his face, not at his guards, only his hands, as if reading something written there that nobody else could see. The boss noticed and walked on without comment. But he did not forget. That evening a teacher found a drawing slipped under the staff room door. A building with tall flames climbing its walls. A man standing inside the fire with arms outstretched. And in the lower corner, drawn with careful lines, was a symbol. A snake curled tightly around a burning flame. The teacher laughed when she found it. Children drew strange things constantly. Monsters, explosions, creatures with too many eyes. She pinned it to the classroom notice board beside a yellow bird drawing and forgot about it completely. The drawing did not stay unnoticed for long. 2 days later, the boss returned to the school with a second donation. While the headmistress led him through the main corridor, he passed the classroom and stopped walking. He stood in the doorway. His eyes moved slowly across the notice board, past the yellow bird, past a football field sketch, past a child's unsteady portrait of his mother. Then he found it. The burning building. The man in the flames. The snake around the fire. The temperature of his expression dropped several degrees. The headmistress kept talking, unaware he had stopped listening entirely. He pointed at the drawing without touching it. "Who made this?" he asked quietly. The teacher stepped forward, apologizing without knowing why. It had appeared under the staff room door. She did not know which child had drawn it. The boss stared at the symbol in the lower corner for a long, still moment. Then he told her the drawing needed to be removed immediately. Not filed. Not kept. Destroyed. Nobody asked why. That night the lights in the boss's main office burned past midnight. He sat at his desk with a glass of water he never drank, turning one question over in his mind. Who was this child? Not the way a man wonders about a stranger. The way a man wonders about a threat. Before we continue, if stories about redemption, hidden secrets, and the power of truth move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We share stories that make you think differently about right and wrong. Then he called his head of intelligence, a lean man named Faisal, and gave the order plainly. Find everything about the quiet boy from Bernie district. Faisal returned before morning with very little. The boy's name was Nuru. He was 8 years old. He had arrived in Bernie district 4 months ago with his grandmother, an elderly woman named Hajia Zura. No previous school records. No medical files. No birth certificate that traced easily. The grandmother had given a neighboring district as their last address, but nobody there remembered them. One detail stood out above everything else. When the boss's men arrived with Thursday supplies, Hajia Zara had turned them away. Politely but firmly. No food. No medicine. Nothing for Nuru. She watched the truck leave with her arms crossed, and her expression completely flat. When one man pressed her, she looked at him with calm, unhurried eyes. Some debts burn forever, she said. Tell him that. 2 weeks after the drawing disappeared from the school notice board, one of the boss's most trusted captains died in a fire. His name was Musa Gubra. He had run the Western warehouse operation for 7 years without a visible mistake. Loyal, quiet, and reliable. The kind of man organizations quietly depend on without ever saying so. The fire broke out at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. The official investigation called it an electrical fault in the warehouse ceiling. Faulty wiring, poor ventilation, too much stored equipment. A tragic accident. The mafia boss did not believe in accidents. He walked the ruins himself the following morning while his men waited at a distance. The smell was still thick. Burned wood, melted metal, and something underneath it all he could not name. He moved slowly through the eastern wall section, the part that had somehow held through the worst of the flames. And there, at eye level, marked in dark lines against scorched concrete, was the symbol. A snake wrapped around a burning flame. The same symbol from Nuru's drawing. The boss did not react outwardly. He stood very still, breathing slowly. Then he turned and walked back toward his car without speaking. In the car with doors closed, he finally allowed himself to think what he had been avoiding. He knew that symbol. He had not seen it in 10 years. He had believed he would never see it again. The boss gathered his 4 senior captains in a private room above the Zaria Road restaurant. He offered no greetings and locked the door himself. What he was about to say would not leave the room. 10 years ago, before his empire reached its current size, he had faced his most dangerous rival. A criminal network called the Adder Ring, named for their symbol of a snake around a flame. Their leader was a man named Hassan Dabo. Patient, intelligent, expanding south with growing boldness. The boss had decided the only permanent solution was fire. His men had surrounded the Adder Ring's main compound on the edge of Massacre district. They blocked every exit. Everyone inside died. 7 men. Hassan Dabo among them. The boss had never lost sleep over it. His captains listened without moving. Someone is drawing that symbol now, one said carefully. Which means someone survived, another replied. Before the boss could respond, his personal phone buzzed once. A single message from an unknown number. He read it aloud without expression. The fire did not finish the job. The room went very quiet. The captains looked at each other and then back at the boss. His face showed nothing, but his hands, resting flat on the table, pressed down slightly harder than necessary. That same evening, Faisal came to the boss with his full report on Hajia Zara. The information had taken longer than usual because someone had taken great care to make it difficult. Records that should have existed had gaps. Neighbors who should have remembered could not quite recall details. But Faisal was thorough, and eventually the pieces came together. Hajia Zara's full name was Zara Dabo. She was the younger sister of Hassan Dabo, the leader of the Adder Ring, the man who had died in the Massacre compound fire 10 years ago. Faisal placed the folder on the desk and stepped back. The boss sat with the information. The grandmother who refused his charity, who sent the message about debts that burn forever, who had arrived in Burney District 4 months ago, around the same time the symbol began reappearing. She was the dead gang leader's own sister. And Nuru, the boy with impossible memories and steady eyes, was living in her house. Who was the child to her? The boss asked. We are not completely certain, Faisal said carefully. She introduced him to neighbors only as her grandson. But there is no record of her ever having children of her own. The boss was quiet for a moment. Find out, he said. The boss chose to visit Hajia Zara himself rather than send men ahead. He arrived at her small house in Burney District in the early morning, with only 2 guards told to wait at the corner. She opened the door before he knocked. She was a small woman, older than he expected, with deep-set eyes and hands worn by decades of hard work. She looked at him with no surprise and no fear. She simply stepped back to allow him inside. The house was clean and sparsely furnished. A mat, 2 low chairs, a table with a kettle. Nuru was not visible. They sat across from each other. You destroyed a family the night of that fire, she said without preamble. My brother, his wife, his friends, people with names, people who were loved. She paused and looked at him steadily. But you did not destroy everything. Her eyes moved briefly toward the back room. She drew breath to continue. Then her body softened without warning. Her head tilted. Her hands slipped from her lap. The boss moved quickly, catching her before she hit the floor. He called out. His guards were through the door in seconds. She was breathing, but barely. Her pulse was weak and racing. As they lifted her, her lips moved once. The boss leaned close to hear. Ask the boy, she whispered. They took Hajia Zara to a private doctor immediately. The boss sat with Nuru in the house while she was being treated. The boy sat on the mat with his knees pulled to his chest, watching the door without visible worry. The boss sat across from him and decided honesty was the only approach that worked with this child. Tell me what you remember, he said. About the fire. Nuru was quiet briefly. Then he began speaking in a flat, careful voice, the way children speak when repeating something they have rehearsed inside their own minds many times. He described a large room with high walls, smoke arriving before the heat, people moving fast. Gasoline poured in a long line from the east door toward the center of the building, where the largest group of people stood. The boss listened without moving. The boy described the eastern door specifically, the iron bar locked across it. The fact that north side windows had been nailed shut from the outside before the fire began. These were details that had never appeared in any investigation. Details the boss had never spoken aloud to any person. Details only someone present that night could possibly know. Nuru paused and looked at the floor. You didn't check the basement, he said quietly. The old MAFIA compound had been a ruin for 10 years. The city had attempted to demolish it twice and abandoned both efforts. What remained was a skeleton of blackened walls, collapsed roof sections, and floors buried under years of debris. People in the surrounding neighborhood said it carried bad luck and gave it wide space. The boss arrived with Faisal and 3 trusted men just before dawn. They moved through the ruin carefully with flashlights against the gray darkness. The boss carried the compound's original layout in his memory. He knew every plan he had ever reviewed showed no basement. But Nuru had been specific. They found the trapdoor under a collapsed interior wall, buried beneath bricks and ash, but structurally intact. It took 20 minutes of careful clearing to expose the iron ring handle. The space below was barely large enough for an adult to stand. The air was old and sealed. A narrow mat lay folded in one corner. Beside it, a tin cup, a child's cloth toy, burned along one edge but mostly whole. A small stack of bricks arranged like steps near the trapdoor opening, as if someone had been helped down in a hurry. The boss stood at the edge and looked down for a long moment. Someone had survived in here. Someone had been placed here before the fire, by hands that already knew what was coming. The boss returned to his office and arranged the new information in front of him like a map he could almost read. The hidden basement. A survivor. Hajia Zara connected directly to Hassan Dabo. Nuru living in her house, carrying memories no child his age should hold. His first conclusion formed quickly. Hajia Zara had hidden someone in the basement that night. Perhaps Nuru had been lowered through the trapdoor as an infant just before the fire spread. She survived, raised the child, and eventually returned to begin a slow operation of revenge. He explained this reasoning to Faisal. Faisal listened carefully. Then he opened a second folder he had been holding and placed it on the desk without comment. He pointed to a line in the structural report his team had quietly obtained from the original post-fire investigation files. The trapdoor mechanism used a sliding bolt mounted on the outside of the door. The basement had no handle, no mechanism, no way to open or close the door from the interior side. The trapdoor had been bolted shut from the outside before the fire. Someone had locked whoever was in that basement deliberately. They had either returned to free them after the flames died, or someone else entirely had reached them. The boss leaned back slowly. His first conclusion had been wrong. There was another person he had not yet found. The retired detective came to the boss without being summoned. His name was Alhaji Sul. He had served the city police for 22 years before stepping away quietly, the way men do when their questions make colleagues uncomfortable. He was 60 now, gray at the temples, and walked with a slight lean to the left. He arrived at the Zaria Road restaurant, gave the boss's name to the man at the door, and waited without nervousness until he was brought upstairs. He sat and placed a single brown envelope on the table. "I have been watching what is happening to your organization," Sul said. "The fire's the symbol. I know it because I investigated the Massacre compound fire when it happened." "Speak plainly," the boss said. Hassan Dabo had 2 children. The records showed a daughter, age 4, who died in the fire. But there was also a son, an infant. He was never found. No body, no trace. Sul tapped the envelope. "The case was closed because your people made it convenient to close. But the missing infant was never properly explained. I kept the file because something felt wrong." The boss studied him. "One child was never found after that fire." Sul continued, watching the boss's expression carefully. "And now someone is dismantling your empire piece by piece from the inside." Over the following 10 days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. 3 incidents struck the boss's operations with precise, unhurried timing. A car carrying cash from his northern collection point crashed into a barrier after its brakes failed. No driver died, but the money was lost and recovered by the wrong people. A storage warehouse in the Tuduan district caught fire overnight. Investigators found no logical ignition point. In the Sabangari district, a business account used for cleaning income was frozen by the tax authority following an anonymous tip accompanied by documents the boss had never shared outside his immediate circle. Each location carried the symbol afterward, the snake around the flame, drawn in chalk or scratched into surfaces where his men would find it. Sul sat with the boss and spread all 3 incidents side by side. "This is not random," Sul said. "Whoever is doing this knows your complete infrastructure. Accounts, routes, storage points. They are not destroying everything at once because destruction is not the primary goal." He paused. "They want you to watch it disappear slowly. They want you afraid first." "Systematic," the boss said. "Planned years in advance," Sul replied. "Whoever this is, they did not rush. They built this carefully. They are patient in a way that only comes from very old anger." The realization arrived in the middle of the night, as the worst realizations do. The boss was reviewing the routes his Thursday charity trucks had traveled over 3 months. Burni District, Makara District, Sabangari, Tuduan, the Northern Collection Corridor. He lined them against the incident list. They matched exactly. Every single attack had occurred at a location the charity trucks had passed through or stopped near. His own community protection program had traced his empire's geography and delivered that map directly to whoever was using it against him. The program had been his idea. He had announced it publicly as proof he could be something other than feared. He had wanted to be seen as a protector, and in doing so he had opened every carefully locked door in his organization. His routes were his secrets. Collection points, storage warehouses, financial operations, all positioned in quiet corners only his inner circle knew. The charity program had required his men to travel those routes openly, in marked trucks, for months in full public view. He had handed a complete map of himself to his enemy and dressed it up as generosity. The mafia boss set the papers down slowly and pressed both palms flat on the desk. He had not been ambushed or outmaneuvered in one moment. He had been used. Slowly, completely, and by his own hand. The most painful kind of defeat. Sul arrived the following morning carrying a document that changed the picture again. His source inside the city revenue office had pulled the original financial registration for the Neighborhood Shield program. Every organization receiving regular donations had to file basic records. The boss had funded the program through a clean secondary account. But someone else had also been depositing money into the program's operational fund. Small irregular amounts. Always from different transfer points across 3 states. Untraceable to any obvious source. Sewell had chased the trail through 4 intermediary accounts before it went cold. But before disappearing completely, the money pointed backward to one origin. A dormant account registered under a business name that no longer existed anywhere in official records. The business was a supply company Hassan Dabo had operated to move equipment for the Outer Ring. Someone had used money from the dead gang leader's hidden financial reserves to quietly co-fund the boss's own charity program from the inside. They had helped make the community operation run smoothly enough to reach every district the boss controlled. Paid for trucks that mapped his entire empire. Contributed to the program that ultimately exposed him. The boss stared at the documents in silence. They funded my own destruction, he said. With his father's money, Sewell replied quietly. Sewell had spent weeks quietly building the case before approaching the boss. He placed photographs on the table one at a time. A partial birth record reconstructed from hospital archive fragments. A school photograph from a city in the north, a boy aged 11. A name appearing on a university enrollment list. A face at the edge of a crowd outside a business registration office 2 years ago. Hassan Dabo's missing infant had not simply survived. He had grown up. His name, from the partial birth record, was Idris Dabo. He was now 20 years old. He had been raised across 3 different cities by extended family members, moving often enough to stay invisible. Educated quietly. Shaped with patience over many years. Sewell did not have a current address. The trail went cold 18 months ago when Idris had apparently stopped using any traceable identity entirely. But in the business registration photograph, standing at the frame's edge with his face half turned toward the camera, there was enough to see. High cheekbones. Steady eyes. A particular stillness that comes not from peace, but from long, careful practice. The boss looked at the photograph for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked at Faisal. The new people brought into accounts management over the past year, he said. I want names and histories reviewed immediately. He already suspected what Faisal would find. Idris Dabo did not wait to be found. 3 days after Sewell identified him, he walked into the Zaria Road restaurant at noon on a Thursday and asked the man at the door for the boss by name. He was calm, dressed simply. He carried nothing visible. They searched him twice and found nothing. They brought him upstairs. He sat across from the boss without waiting to be invited and looked at him the way people look at something they have studied for a very long time. You have been looking for me, Idris said. You made that necessary, the boss replied. Idris nodded. I came because I decided the time was right. Not because you found me. He explained, without drama and without visible anger, that he had entered the boss's organization 16 months ago using a constructed identity and genuine skills. He had worked in financial operations, trusted enough to see everything he needed to see. He fed information outward carefully and never quickly. The charity program had been his idea, passed through indirect channels until a captain brought it to the boss as his own suggestion. You plan to destroy me slowly, the boss said. Yes, Idris replied. And the symbol. So you would know exactly who was taking everything. I wanted you to understand. I wanted you afraid the way my family was afraid that night. The boss looked at Idris steadily before speaking again. The boy, he said. Nuru. Idris shifted. The first real change in his expression since sitting down. He is not part of my plan, Idris said. He knows things about the massacre fire that no living person should know. I know. Idris's voice dropped slightly. I did not tell him anything. I never briefed him on the fire, on you, on any of it. He was placed with Hajia Zara because she was the only family I could locate who would keep him safely while I worked. I needed them in this city, but I did not involve Nuru deliberately. Then where do his memories come from? I do not know, Idris said. And for the first time he sounded precisely like what he was. A young man who had spent years constructing certainty and found one thing that would not fit inside it. He described the iron bar on the east door, the boss said. The nailed windows on the north side. The gasoline line. Details that never appeared in any investigation. Idris looked at the table. I was an infant, he said quietly. I carry none of those memories myself. He looked up. Whatever Nuru knows, it did not come from me. And that is the one part of all of this I cannot explain. The boss went back to Nuru. Haji Azara was recovering slowly but was too weak for a real conversation. Nuru sat beside her bed reading a school textbook and looked up when the boss entered without surprise or alarm. They moved to the outer room. The boss sat in the low chair. Nuru sat cross-legged on the mat, and they looked at each other with the particular quiet of two people who have decided to be honest. "Tell me about your memories," the boss said. "The ones from the fire." Nuru thought for a moment. "They come in pieces," he said. "Like remembering a dream after you wake up. Some parts are clear. Some are just feelings." "What feelings?" "Heat. Loud sound. A smell like something burning that was not wood." He paused. "And being held. Someone was holding you." "Yes. Someone was carrying me. I could not see their face. But the arms were large and the movement was very fast. Like running." The boss kept completely still. "What else?" "Cold air after the heat. And I was put down on something rough. Like ground." Nuru frowned carefully. "And then the arms were gone. And it was very dark and quiet." He looked up with those steady, too old eyes. "I always thought it was a dream," Nuru said. "But it feels too real to be a dream." The cold feeling the boss had carried in his chest for weeks became something sharper and impossible to hold at a distance. He stood from the chair without planning to. He walked to the window of Haji Azara's small house and stood with his back to Nuru, looking at the narrow street outside. Children were kicking a plastic bottle between themselves in the afternoon dust. Completely ordinary, completely unaware. His mind moved backward through 10 years with slow, deliberate care. The night of the massacre fire. He had overseen it personally. He arrived after his men set everything in motion to confirm the result. The building was fully burning when he walked the perimeter. His men were positioned at every exit. Then on the eastern side near the back wall, where debris was thickest, he had heard something. Not a voice. Not a shout. A sound too small for the noise of everything burning. He had moved the debris with his own hands before he had fully decided to. Underneath a collapsed roof section, he found a trapdoor. He had pulled it open. The infant inside lay on the folded mat, breathing fast in the thickening air, silent now from pure exhaustion. He turned away from the window and looked at Nuru. The boy was watching him the same way he had watched him from the school desk. Then Nuru raised one hand and pointed directly at the boss. "You," he said simply. The memory returned with the force of something held underwater for 10 years. He had stood over the open trapdoor for 3 full seconds. His men had confirmed everyone inside the compound was gone. That was the mission. That was his order. But the child was not a soldier. Not a name on any list. Not a threat to anything. He had reached into the basement, lifted the baby out, and carried him at a run around the burning perimeter to the nearest open street. An elderly woman sat outside her doorway, not yet understanding what the orange glow in the sky behind her meant. He had placed the infant in her arms without a word. Then he turned and walked back. He told no one. Not his captains. Not Faisal. No one. He had told himself it was a practical decision. A baby was not a witness. Drawing attention to a surviving infant would create complications he did not need. But standing now in Haji Azara's house, looking at the boy who had grown from that night, the boss understood he had been lying to himself for 10 years. He had saved the child because even then, even at the absolute worst of what he was capable of, there was a line he could not make himself cross. He just had never admitted it, not even in private, not even alone in the dark. Idris Dabo heard the full account the following evening. The boss had requested his return to the restaurant. Sul was present. Faisal waited outside the door. Nuru sat quietly in the corner, brought by one of the boss's quietest men. The boss told it plainly and without decoration. The trapdoor. The infant. The elderly woman on the street. The silence he had kept for 10 years. Idris listened without moving. When the boss finished, the room held a long, complete quiet. Idris looked at Nuru for a sustained moment. The boy looked back with that familiar steadiness, not yet understanding the full weight of what had just been explained. Then Idris looked at the floor. He pressed one hand flat against the table. His jaw tightened slightly. The careful, constructed certainty he had spent 10 years building was shifting underneath him, and the effort of holding himself together showed plainly for the first time. He had carried one clean story. The ruthless boss had burned his family. There was nothing complicated in that. The revenge was justified and exact. And now the same man he had spent a decade dismantling had also been the hands that pulled his infant brother from a burning basement and placed him into safety. Nuru tilted his head and looked across the table at the boss. "Why did you save me if you killed everyone else?" he asked. The room held its breath. The boss looked at Nuru for a long moment before he answered. Around him, the evening sounds of the city filtered through the walls. Traffic somewhere distant. A vendor calling. The ordinary, indifferent noise of a city that did not know this room existed. "Because even monsters have lines they cannot cross," the boss said. It was not an excuse. His voice carried no request for understanding. It was simply the truth, stated plainly for the first time. Nuru nodded slowly, as if the answer matched something he had already sensed. Idris sat still for a long time. Then he stood, picked up the envelope containing years of planning, financial records, and contacts, and placed it on the table in front of the boss without a word. He walked to Nuru, placed one hand briefly on the boy's head, then looked at Hajia Zara, who sat near the door, still weak but present. He spoke to her softly. She reached up and touched his face. Then he left. Nuru stayed. The revenge did not end dramatically. It simply stopped, like a fire that had finally run out of fuel. In the years that followed, the boss's empire did not recover. Too many structures had been weakened, too many accounts exposed. He contracted slowly, district by district, until only a shadow remained of what had been. He was never arrested. He was never publicly named. He simply became smaller. The city forgot him the way cities forget things that no longer carry power. But it remembered one story, that the most feared man in the city had been undone not by a rival, not by the law, but by a small boy with bare feet and steady eyes who walked straight up to him in a crowded marketplace and told the truth out loud. Fear gives power to the wrong people, until someone brave enough speaks. And sometimes that someone is the very person you try to leave behind. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge everything you believe about loyalty, family, and redemption. Thank you for watching.